A hush fell over the first-class cabin of Zenith Airlines Flight 402. Captain Foley stood over seat 1A, his face flushed with impatience, demanding the calm, casually dressed black man surrender his boarding pass. Whispers rippled through the aisles as passengers watched, expecting an immediate ejection. But when the man finally reached into his leather wallet, he didn't pull out a standard paper ticket. He pulled out a sleek, solid titanium card that would instantly drain all the color from the captain's face. The atmosphere inside Terminal 4 of John F. Kennedy International Airport was a chaotic symphony of rolling luggage, overlapping intercom announcements, and the dull roar of thousands of travelers rushing to their destinations. But for Terence Whitmore, the noise was nothing more than background static. Sitting quietly near Gate B-22, he stared out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the sleek, freshly painted Boeing 777-300ER being prepped for the long-haul flight to Los Angeles. Emblazoned across the fuselage in bold navy and gold lettering was the name, Zenith Airlines. Terence took a slow sip of his black coffee, his eyes tracking the baggage handlers below. He was 38, completely exhausted and dressed in a way that deliberately prioritized comfort over status. He wore a plain, charcoal gray cashmere hoodie, well-fitted dark denim jeans, and a pair of clean, understated sneakers. There were no flashy logos, no ostentatious jewelry, and nothing about his exterior that screamed wealth. Only an expert horologist might have recognized the rare, vintage Patek Philippe, resting quietly on his left wrist, partially hidden beneath the sleeve of his hoodie. It had been a grueling 48 hours in New York City. Terence, the founder and CEO of a private equity firm that specialized in resurrecting struggling transportation sectors, had spent the last 2 days locked in a windowless boardroom. The negotiations had been vicious, but ultimately victorious. As of 3 a.m. that morning, Terence's firm had officially acquired a 60% controlling stake in Zenith Airlines, effectively making him the outright owner of the carrier. He was flying to Los Angeles to meet with the West Coast executive team to begin the immediate restructuring process. For now, though, he just wanted to sleep. He wanted to recline in seat 1A, close his eyes, and disappear for 6 hours. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now beginning the boarding process for Zenith Airlines Flight 402 to Los Angeles. The intercom buzzed, the voice of the gate agent echoing through the seating area. We will begin with our Zenith Diamond Medallion members and passengers seated in first class. Terence let out a quiet sigh of relief. He picked up his small leather duffel bag, adjusted his hoodie, and walked toward the designated priority boarding lane. The lane was empty save for one other person, an older, impeccably dressed woman adorned in pearls, draped in a tan trench coat and clutching a designer handbag like a shield. This was Beatrice Lowell, a woman whose entire demeanor radiated generational wealth and an unyielding sense of entitlement. As Terence stepped onto the blue carpet of the priority lane, Beatrice stiffened. She glanced back over her shoulder, her eyes sweeping over his hoodie, his jeans, and his skin color. Her lips instantly thinned into a tight, disapproving line. Before Terence could even reach the boarding podium, Beatrice took a sudden half-step backward, intentionally blocking his path. She turned to face him, offering a deeply patronizing smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me, young man," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I believe you might be confused. This line is specifically for first class. The main cabin boarding won't be called for at least another 20 minutes. You need to wait in Zone 4. Terence paused, blinking slowly as he absorbed the sheer audacity of the assumption. He maintained a neutral, polite expression. "I'm in the right place, ma'am. Thank you, though. Beatrice let out a sharp, incredulous scoff, adjusting the strap of her handbag. Are you quite sure? Because they are very strict about the boarding zones now. It causes quite a delay for those of us who paid a premium when people try to rush the gate. I am quite sure, Terence replied, his tone remaining even and unbothered. He didn't owe her an explanation, nor did he care to engage in a debate about his financial status with a stranger. Beatrice turned back around, muttering something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like, "Unbelievable." At the podium stood Amanda Collins, the lead gate agent. Amanda looked stressed, frantically typing on her keyboard as the boarding software seemed to be experiencing a lag. When Beatrice stepped up, Amanda forced a bright, customer service smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Lowell. Welcome back. Have a wonderful flight to Los Angeles." Amanda greeted warmly, scanning Beatrice's paper boarding pass. The machine let out a pleasant, high-pitched ding, and Beatrice strutted down the jet bridge without another glance backward. Terence stepped forward next. He pulled out his phone, pulling up the digital boarding pass he had been issued by his assistant earlier that morning. He placed the screen face down on the glass scanner. The machine did not ding. Instead, it flashed a bright red light and emitted a harsh, low-pitched buzz. Amanda's customer service smile instantly vanished. She looked at the red light, then looked up at Terence, her eyes narrowing with immediate suspicion. "Sir, I need to see your boarding pass," Amanda said, her tone remarkably colder than it had been mere seconds prior. "I just scanned it," Terence said, flipping his phone over to show her the screen. The digital pass clearly displayed his name, Whitmore, T, and his seat, 1A. Amanda squinted at the screen, then typed something aggressively into her computer terminal. She shook her head. "The system is saying that seat 1A is under a corporate lock. It's an executive hold. It doesn't have a passenger name attached to it in my main directory." "It's a recent booking," Terence explained calmly. "The reservation was made just a few hours ago through the corporate office. If you refresh the manifest, my name should populate." Amanda didn't refresh the manifest. Instead, she looked Terence up and down, taking in his casual streetwear. Her expression was one of blatant disbelief. "Sir, I cannot let you board if the system flags the seat as restricted. Did you buy this ticket on a third-party discount site? Because sometimes those sites sell fraudulent first-class tickets." Terence felt a familiar, exhausting heat rise in his chest. It was a prejudice he had faced his entire life, one that no amount of money or success had ever truly shielded him from. "I didn't buy it on a discount site, Amanda," he said, purposefully reading her name tag. "It was booked directly through Zenith's executive desk. Please, just refresh the system." Amanda let out a dramatic, put-upon sigh. She clicked a few buttons on her keyboard. After a grueling 10 seconds, the red banner on her screen slowly turned green, and the name Whitmore Terence appeared next to seat 1A. Amanda frowned, clearly annoyed that she had been proven wrong. She didn't apologize. She simply waved her hand dismissively toward the door. "Go ahead, but they'll check it again on the plane." Terence didn't say a word. He just picked up his duffel bag and walked down the jet bridge, the quiet hum of the aircraft growing louder with every step. He was too tired to argue, but a mental note was permanently lodged in his mind. Zenith's ground customer service training needs a complete overhaul. He had no idea that the disrespect at the gate was only the beginning. The interior of the Zenith Airline's Boeing 777 first-class cabin was designed to mimic the elegance of a five-star hotel. The lighting was a soft, warm amber. The seats were massive, enclosed pods constructed from cream-colored leather and dark mahogany veneer. Quiet jazz played through the cabin speakers, Terence stepped aboard, greeted the flight attendant at the door with a polite nod, and turned left into the premium cabin. He found seat 1A, a spacious window suite at the very front bulkhead. He stowed his duffel bag in the overhead compartment, slid into the plush leather seat, and let out a deep breath, savoring the feeling of the heavy cushions absorbing his weight. He pulled his phone from his pocket, sent a quick text to his chief operating officer that he was boarding, and then switched his device to airplane mode. Across the aisle in seat 1D sat Beatrice Lowell. As Terence settled into his seat, Beatrice was staring at him, her jaw slightly unhinged. She looked from him to the seat number and back to him again. It was as if his mere presence in the cabin was a personal insult to her reality. She violently rustled her copy of the Wall Street Journal, holding it up high as if to build a physical barrier between them. A moment later, the lead flight attendant walked into the cabin. Her name tag read Patricia Danvers. Patricia was a veteran of the sky, a woman in her late 40s whose tight, immaculately sprayed blonde bun matched her rigid posture. She carried a silver tray lined with crystal flutes, filled with expensive champagne. Patricia approached Beatrice first. "Good morning, Mrs. Lowell. So wonderful to see you flying with us again. Champagne before departure?" "Oh yes, Patricia, darling." "Thank you," Beatrice said, accepting the flute. She then leaned in closer to the flight attendant, lowering her voice to a theatrical whisper that was entirely audible in the quiet cabin. "Patricia, are you absolutely certain the manifest is correct today?" Patricia paused, her professional smile faltering slightly. "What do you mean, Mrs. Lowell?" Beatrice subtly jutted her chin toward Terence, who was currently staring out the window, pretending not to hear them. "It's just that young man over there." In 1A, he was holding up the line at the gate. The machine flagged his ticket. "I just want to ensure that security protocols are being followed. You know how things are these days. People sneaking into cabins where they don't belong." Patricia turned her head, her sharp gaze landing on Terence's grey hoodie. The smile on her face completely dissolved. "I see. Let me double-check my tablet, Mrs. Lowell. Thank you for bringing it to my attention." Patricia walked over to the front galley, pulling her company-issued tablet from its charging dock. She tapped on the seating chart for the first-class cabin. Seats 1D, 2A, 2D, and 3A were all marked green with passenger names. Seat 1A, however, was flashing a bright, pulsing orange. The tablet read, "Restrict VIPX block, no public access." Because Terence's booking had been forced through by the board of directors mere hours ago, the standard flight attendant software had not fully reconciled the data update. To a seasoned flight attendant, an orange executive block meant one of two things. Either an executive was flying incognito, or the seat was supposed to be completely empty. Given the way Terence was dressed, and Beatrice's planted seed of doubt, Patricia immediately concluded the latter. She assumed a passenger from economy had seen an empty first-class suite and simply decided to make himself comfortable. Patricia grabbed the champagne tray, walking past Terence's seat without offering him a glass. Terence didn't mind. He didn't drink alcohol anyway. "Excuse me," Terence Hornscout politely as she passed. "Could I just get a glass of still water when you have a moment?" Patricia stopped. She slowly turned to face him, her posture rigid, her expression cold and authoritarian. "Sir, I need to see your boarding pass," Patricia demanded. She didn't ask politely. It was a direct, confrontational order. Terence slowly turned his head away from the window, his eyebrows knitting together in confusion. "I scanned it at the gate. The agent verified it. I don't care what happened at the gate. I am the lead flight attendant on this aircraft, and my manifest shows that this seat is supposed to be unoccupied," Patricia said, her voice rising in volume. Several other passengers in the cabin, including Beatrice, turned their heads to watch the unfolding drama. So I will ask you one more time. Produce a valid first-class boarding pass, or I will ask you to return to your assigned seat in the main cabin. Terence took a slow, deep breath, maintaining his composure. The absolute lack of basic customer service etiquette was astounding to him. As the new owner of the airline, he was taking a mental inventory of every single protocol failure happening in real time. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and opened his digital wallet. He turned the screen toward her. "Here is my boarding pass. Seat 1A, Terence Whitmore." Patricia squinted at the screen. She shook her head dismissively. "That's just a screenshot on an app. Anyone can Photoshop a screenshot, sir. I need to see the live Zenith application, or I need a printed ticket. If you cannot provide a live ticket, I am going to have to ask you to vacate this suite immediately. The airport Wi-Fi disconnected when I got on the plane, and we are currently inside a metal tube, so the cellular service is completely dead," Terence explained, his voice remarkably steady despite the blatant disrespect. "It's not a screenshot, it's Apple Wallet. Furthermore, my name is in the system. The gate agent had to refresh her system to see it. Perhaps you should try refreshing your tablet." Patricia's eyes narrowed. She felt her authority was being challenged, and in the confined space of an airplane, flight attendants rarely backed down. "Do not tell me how to do my job, sir. My tablet is perfectly synced. It says this seat is restricted. Now, gather your bag and move to the back, or I will have the captain remove you from this aircraft." Across the aisle, Beatrice Lowell let out a smug, satisfied chuckle, taking a sip of her champagne. "I knew it," she muttered loudly. Unbelievable, the nerve of some people. Terence didn't look at Beatrice. He kept his eyes locked on Patricia. The exhaustion in his bones was rapidly being replaced by a cold, calculating anger. He wasn't just a passenger being discriminated against. He was a CEO watching his own employees mistreat a customer based entirely on racial and socioeconomic profiling. "I am not moving," Terence said firmly, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a weight of authority that made Patricia flinch. "I paid for this seat. I belong in this seat. If you have an issue, I suggest you go speak to your captain, because I am not going anywhere." Patricia's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. "Fine, have it your way." She spun on her heel and marched directly toward the cockpit doors, her footsteps heavy with indignation. Inside the cockpit, Captain Harrison Foley was already having a miserable morning. Foley was a 22-year veteran of Zenith Airlines, a man who prided himself on punctuality and absolute control. He was currently dealing with a minor maintenance log issue regarding a sensor on the right engine, which had already delayed their pushback by 15 minutes. The last thing he wanted was a cabin disturbance. The heavy reinforced cockpit door chimed and swung open. Patricia stepped inside, shutting the door firmly behind her. "Harrison, we have a major problem in first class," Patricia said, her voice breathless and frantic. Captain Foley sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. He didn't even turn around from his instrument panel. "What is it, Patty?" "Someone complaining about the delay. Tell them to write a letter to corporate." "No, it's a passenger. A young black man in a hoodie. He's sitting in 1A. My tablet shows 1A is under an executive restriction and is supposed to be empty." The gate agent must have let him slip past, or he boarded with economy and snuck into the front during the rush. He refuses to show me a live ticket, claims his phone has no service, and he's becoming hostile and belligerent. Foley stiffened. The words hostile and belligerent were all a pilot needed to hear to justify an ejection. "Did you ask him to move to his assigned seat?" "He refuses to move. He told me to come get you." He's digging his heels in, Harrison. He's making the other first-class passengers incredibly uncomfortable. Beatrice Lowell is out there, and you know she's a diamond medallion who complains about everything. Foley unbuckled his seatbelt with a sharp click. Unbelievable. Security at this airport is a joke. He turned to his first officer, a younger man named Jameson Reed. Jameson, keep ATC on the horn. Let them know we might need gate security if this guy decides to put up a fight. I'm going to go handle this. Copy that, Captain, Jameson replied, keeping his eyes on the screens. Captain Foley grabbed his uniform hat, placing it squarely on his head, adjusting it so the gold Zenith wings sat perfectly in the center. He opened the cockpit door and stepped out into the forward galley. Patricia trailed closely behind him, a smug look of vindication already forming on her face. Foley marched into the first-class cabin. His presence immediately commanded the room. He was a large, imposing man, and he used his physical size to intimidate passengers who stepped out of line. He walked straight up to seat 1A and stopped, crossing his arms over his chest. Terence looked up from his phone. He took in the sight of the captain and the flight attendant standing over him like prison guards. "Is there a problem, Captain?" Terence asked, his voice deadpan. "You're the problem, son," Captain Foley said, his tone incredibly condescending, skipping right past any professional pleasantries. "My lead flight attendant tells me you're refusing to show valid proof of ticketing, and you're occupying a restricted seat. Now I don't have time for games today. We are already running behind schedule. You are going to pack up your bag, and you are going to step off my aircraft immediately." Terence leaned back in his seat, resting his elbows on the armrests. He laced his fingers together. "Captain Foley, is it?" Terence said, reading the name embroidered on the pilot's jacket. "Has anyone on your crew actually bothered to call the gate desk or refresh the main manifest? Because if you did, you would see that seat 1A is registered to me." "Don't play lawyer with me," Foley snapped, leaning down slightly to invade Terence's personal space. "I've flown for Zenith for 22 years. I know what an executive restriction is. It's a seat blocked out for high-level corporate personnel or the board of directors. And no offense, pal, but you don't look like you sit on the board of anything. You have exactly 30 seconds to get up, or I am calling Port Authority police to drag you off." A heavy silence draped over the cabin. The other passengers were holding their breath. Beatrice Lowell was practically vibrating with excitement, eager to watch Terence be humiliated and escorted away in handcuffs. Terence stared into Captain Foley's eyes. He saw the arrogance. He saw the absolute certainty in the pilot's mind that Terence was nothing more than a criminal, a fraud, a man who didn't belong in a space reserved for the elite. "They really think they own this plane," Terence thought to himself. "They really think they have all the power. You're threatening to have me arrested because your tablet hasn't synced with the corporate server?" Terence asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're willing to delay a flight, bring armed police onto this aircraft, and publicly humiliate a passenger, all because I'm wearing a hoodie and your flight attendant made an assumption." "I am not making an assumption. I am following protocol," Foley barked, his face turning red. "You are trespassing on a commercial airliner. I am the supreme authority on this aircraft, and I am ordering you off." Terence slowly unlaced his fingers. "The supreme authority," he repeated softly. "That's right. Now get up." Terence didn't get up. Instead, he reached slowly into the inner pocket of his cashmere hoodie. Patricia gasped slightly, taking a step back, her prejudice making her instinctively fear what a black man reaching into his pocket might pull out. But Terence didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a sleek, handcrafted leather wallet. "You want proof of who I am, Captain Foley?" Terence asked, his voice echoing in the dead-silent cabin. You want to know why that seat is flagged under an executive block? I want you off my, Foley reiterated, though a tiny sliver of doubt finally flickered behind his eyes as he watched the supreme calm radiating from Terence. Terence opened his wallet. He didn't reach for a driver's license. He didn't reach for a paper ticket. Instead, he slid 2 fingers into the deepest slot of the wallet and slowly withdrew a card. It wasn't plastic. It was a heavy, brushed titanium card, forged specifically for a select few individuals in the corporate world. The metal caught the soft amber light of the cabin, gleaming with absolute authority. Terence held the card up, pinching it between his index finger and thumb, presenting it directly at eye level for Captain Foley to read. Engraved into the solid metal in deep black enamel was the Zenith Airline's logo. Beneath the logo, etched with precision, were the words, *Terence Whitmore, *majority shareholder and chairman of the board, *owner all-access credential. Captain Foley's eyes locked onto the titanium card. For 3 agonizing seconds, his brain refused to process the information. He squinted, leaning in closer, reading the words once, twice, 3 times. And then the reality of the situation crashed down upon him with the force of a falling anvil. The blood drained completely from Captain Foley's face, leaving him as pale as a ghost. His jaw went slack, and the aggressive, puffed-up posture he had maintained just moments ago seemed to instantly deflate. The supreme authority of the aircraft suddenly realized he had just threatened to have the owner of the airline arrested. For a moment, time inside the cabin of Zenith Airlines Flight 402 seemingly ceased to exist. The only sound was the low, steady thrum of the auxiliary power unit pushing air through the overhead vents. Captain Harrison Foley stood frozen, his eyes glued to the heavy titanium card pinched between Terence's fingers. As a 22-year veteran of the airline, Foley was intimately familiar with the corporate hierarchy. He had seen the standard diamond medallion cards, the VIP paper passes, and the executive employee badges. But he had only ever heard rumors of the titanium owner's credential, a mythic card issued strictly to majority shareholders and board members, granting them absolute, unfettered jurisdiction over any Zenith asset globally. It was designed specifically with micro-engravings and an embedded NFC chip to make forgery physically impossible. I don't understand," Foley stammered, his voice dropping from a booming bark to a hollow, reedy whisper. A single bead of cold sweat broke out along his hairline, just beneath the brim of his captain's hat. Patricia Danvers, standing just over Foley's shoulder, leaned in, her brow furrowing. She read the bold black enamel letters, Terence Whitmore, majority shareholder and chairman of the board. Patricia gasped, a sharp, ragged intake of air that sounded incredibly loud in the quiet cabin. Her hand flew to her mouth, her perfectly manicured nails pressing into her cheeks, as the color completely vanished from her face. Her eyes darted wildly from the metal card to Terence's calm, unblinking face, and then down to his gray cashmere hoodie. "Captain Foley," Terence said, his voice smooth, even, and entirely devoid of the anger one might expect. It was the voice of a man who held all the cards and knew exactly how to play them. "You were speaking about your supreme authority on my aircraft. Please, continue." Foley swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed nervously. "Sir, Mr. Whitmore, I was not informed." "You were not informed." Terence arched a single eyebrow, slowly lowering the titanium card but keeping it visible, resting it on the wide armrest of seat 1A. "My corporate office forced an override into the ticketing system 3 hours ago. Your gate agent saw it. Your flight attendant's tablet flagged it with an executive hold. The information was there, Captain. You and your crew simply chose to ignore it in favor of your own biases. Across the aisle, Beatrice Lowell, who had been leaning practically out of her seat to eavesdrop, let out a sharp, dismissive scoff. Her entitlement blinded her to the shifting reality of the room. "Oh, please, Harrison," Beatrice piped up, waving her hand frantically. "It is obviously a fake. Look at how he's dressed. Do you honestly believe the chairman of Zenith Airlines flies around looking like a vagrant? Call the port authority and have this fraud removed so we can take off." Terence slowly turned his head, his eyes locked onto Beatrice. The temperature in the cabin seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer intensity of his gaze made Beatrice instantly press her back against her plush leather seat. "Mrs. Lowell," Terence said, his tone chillingly polite, "I suggest you return to reading your Wall Street Journal. Specifically, I recommend turning to page 4 of the Business and Finance section. You will find a half-page spread detailing the early morning acquisition of Zenith Airlines by Whitmore Capital Management. It includes my photograph. If you speak to me or my employees with that tone again, your Zenith Diamond Medallion status will be permanently revoked, and you will be placed on a lifetime no-fly list for this carrier. Am I perfectly clear?" Beatrice's jaw snapped shut. She frantically fumbled for her newspaper, her hands trembling violently as she flipped to page 4. Her eyes scanned the ink, locking onto a high-resolution photograph of Terence, wearing a sharp Tom Ford suit, shaking hands with the outgoing CEO. She let out a tiny, high-pitched whimper, holding the newspaper up to obscure her face entirely. Terence turned his attention back to the 2 employees standing before him. "Now," Terence said, steepling his fingers, "Captain Foley, let's discuss protocol. According to Zenith Operations Manual, Section 4, Paragraph 12, a captain must verify a passenger's identity via the main manifest before threatening ejection. Did you do that?" "No, sir," Foley admitted, his voice barely audible. The man who had stormed into the cabin ready to play God was now shrinking into his uniform. "I relied on the report from my lead flight attendant." Terence shifted his gaze to Patricia. She physically flinched under his stare. "Patricia," Terence said softly, "when your tablet showed an executive restriction for seat 1A, did you attempt to call the gate agent to verify?" I assumed." Patricia stammered, tears of sheer panic welling in the corners of her eyes. "Sir, I am so deeply sorry. We have had issues with people sneaking into first class lately, and I made a terrible judgment call." "You made a judgment call based on the color of my skin and the brand of my clothing." Terence corrected her smoothly, leaving absolutely no room for her to hide behind corporate excuses. "You bypassed standard verification protocols because your prejudice dictated that I could not possibly belong in this cabin. And then, instead of de-escalating, you escalated the situation to the flight deck, delaying a flight that is already 15 minutes behind schedule due to a faulty right engine sensor." Foley's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. How do you know about the engine sensor, sir? The mechanics only logged that 20 minutes ago." "Because, Captain Foley, as of 3 a.m., I own the airplanes. I own the sensors. I own the maintenance logs. I am briefed on the operational status of every wide-body aircraft in the domestic fleet," Terence stated, leaning forward slightly. "I am not just a passenger. I am the man who signs your paychecks. And right now, I am severely underwhelmed by the return on my investment." The silence that followed was suffocating. Patricia was openly weeping now, silent tears streaking her immaculate makeup. Foley stood rigidly at attention, his mind racing through the potential ramifications. His pension, his 22 years of seniority, all of it was currently resting in the hands of the man he had just threatened to have arrested. "Mr. Whitmore," Foley began, his voice trembling with genuine remorse. "I offer my deepest, most unreserved apologies. I failed to verify the situation. I let the stress of the delay cloud my judgment, and I approached you with an unacceptable level of disrespect. I take full responsibility. Please, sir, do not punish Patricia for my failure as the commander of this aircraft." Terence studied Foley for a long moment. He was a ruthless businessman, but he wasn't a tyrant. He appreciated Foley's willingness to fall on his sword for his crew, even if the pilot's initial behavior had been abysmal. Terence reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He disabled airplane mode. The device instantly flooded with signal bars. He dialed a number and put the phone on speaker, resting it on the armrest. It rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "David speaking." "David, it's Terence," he said, keeping his eyes locked on Foley. "Good morning, boss. Assuming you're sitting comfortably in 1A. The board is ready for the 1 p.m. briefing when you land in LA. "I am in 1A, but we have experienced a slight delay," Terence replied. "David, I need you to initiate a fleet-wide memo immediately. Effective today, Zenith's ground and air cabin crews will undergo mandatory, comprehensive anti-bias and de-escalation training. I want the curriculum overhauled by the end of the month." "Consider it done, Terence. Do we have a specific incident prompting this?" "Just a real-time audit of our current customer service standards," Terence said dryly. "I will review the specifics with you in Los Angeles. Have a car waiting at LAX." "Will do. Have a good flight, Mr. Whitmore." Terence ended the call. He looked back up at the terrified flight crew. "Captain Foley," Terence said, his tone shifting from interrogator to executive. "You have 212 passengers on this aircraft who have places to be. I am not going to fire you on the tarmac and force this airline to scramble for a replacement pilot, causing a 3-hour delay for paying customers." Foley let out a breath he looked like he had been holding for an hour. "Thank you, sir. Thank you. However," Terence continued, holding up a finger, "when we land in Los Angeles, you will report directly to the chief pilot's office. A formal note will be placed in your file regarding your failure to follow Section 4 verification protocols. You will be flying with a corporate check airman for your next 3 rotations to ensure your adherence to the manual. Is that understood?" "Crystal clear, Mr. Whitmore." "Thank you, sir." Foley nodded vigorously, profound relief washing over his features. "Good. Now get back to the flight deck, clear that maintenance log, and get this aircraft in the sky." Foley gave a crisp, deeply respectful nod, turned on his heel, and retreated to the cockpit with far more humility than he had exited it. Terence then turned his attention to Patricia. She was trembling, holding her silver tray tightly against her chest, as if it could protect her from the inevitable. "Patricia," Terence said, his voice softer now, though still carrying immense authority. "Customer service is the lifeblood of an airline. Without our passengers, these multi-million-dollar machines are just heavy metal sitting on a runway. You made an assumption today that humiliated a customer. It just so happened that the customer was me." "Mr. Whitmore, I am so sorry," Patricia sobbed quietly, wiping her eyes. "I promise you, it will never happen again." "I know it won't," Terence replied, "because for the duration of this 6-hour flight, you will not be serving the first-class cabin." Patricia blinked, confused. "Sir, go to the aft galley. Find the most junior flight attendant working the economy cabin today." "You are going to swap stations with them," Terence instructed. "You are going to work the main cabin, and you are going to treat every single passenger back there, regardless of what they are wearing or what they look like, with the exact same deference and respect you would show a diamond medallion. Member, I will be asking for a full report from the senior economy purser when we land. If your service is anything less than stellar, Your employment with Zenith will be terminated before you leave LAX. Patricia nodded rapidly, incredibly grateful that she still had a job to save. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Absolutely. Right away. Go, Terence commanded gently. Patricia practically sprinted down the aisle toward the back of the plane, eager to escape the suffocating presence of the new owner. Terence leaned back in seat 1A. He took a deep breath, the adrenaline finally beginning to leave his system, replaced once again by the heavy weight of his 48-hour exhaustion. The first-class cabin was dead silent. None of the other passengers dared to make a sound, lest they draw the attention of the man who had just effortlessly dismantled the ship's command structure. A few minutes later, a young, bright-eyed flight attendant in her 20s nervously stepped into the first-class cabin. Her name tag read Jessica. She looked entirely overwhelmed, having just been thrust from serving pretzels in row 42 to managing the elite suites at the front of the plane. Jessica approached seat 1A with trembling hands, carrying a fresh glass of iced sparkling water on a clean tray. Whitmore, sir," Jessica stuttered, offering the tray. "Patricia said you requested some water earlier. I also brought a warm towel, if you'd like." Terence looked at the terrified young woman. He offered her a warm, genuine smile, completely dropping the intimidating CEO persona. "Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate it," Terence said kindly, taking the glass. "And please, take a breath. You have nothing to be nervous about. Just do your job to the best of your ability, and we'll get along perfectly fine." Jessica's shoulders dropped in relief. She beamed back at him. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Welcome aboard Zenith Airlines." As the Boeing 777 finally pushed back from the gate, the engines roaring to life, Terence took a sip of his water and looked out the window. He had a lot of work to do to fix the culture of this company, but as the plane taxied toward the runway, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The cleanup had already begun. For the first 3 hours of the flight, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin was thick, with an uneasy, reverent silence. The Boeing 777 cruised smoothly at 36,000 feet over the American Midwest, the dull roar of the massive Rolls-Royce engines providing a steady, white noise backdrop. Terence Whitmore had opened his laptop, instantly diving into the complex financial spreadsheets and restructuring plans he had drafted for Zenith Airlines. He was in his element, his fingers flying across the keyboard, completely unbothered by the lingering tension in the air. Across the aisle, Beatrice Lowell was trapped in a self-made prison of mortification. She had spent the first hour pretending to sleep, hiding behind her sleep mask to avoid making eye contact with the man she had so confidently tried to banish to the back of the plane. But the silence was eating away at her. People of Beatrice's social standing were not used to being wrong, and they were certainly not used to being rendered powerless. She desperately needed to smooth things over, if only to protect her own pristine, aristocratic self-image. When Jessica, the newly promoted first-class flight attendant, came by to clear Terence's empty water glass, Beatrice finally made her move. She leaned across the wide aisle, offering a tight, fragile smile. "Mr. Whitmore," she whispered, her voice stripped of its previous haughtiness. Terence didn't stop typing. He merely shifted his gaze, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a neutral, calculating expression. "Yes, Mrs. Lowell?" Beatrice cleared her throat, adjusting the collar of her tan trench coat. I just wanted to formally apologize for my earlier remarks at the gate and my assumptions in the cabin. It was incredibly uncharacteristic of me. I was simply stressed about the boarding process, and I judged a book by its cover. I hope you can forgive the indiscretion." Terence slowly closed his laptop. He turned his body slightly to face her, resting his arms on the thick leather armrests. He didn't look angry, which somehow made Beatrice even more terrified. He looked profoundly disappointed. "Mrs. Lowell," Terence began, his voice calm and melodic, "do you know what the true measure of a person's character is?" Beatrice blinked, clearly not expecting a philosophical question. I suppose it's how they treat others. It's how they treat people who can do absolutely nothing for them." Terence corrected her softly. "You aren't apologizing because you feel remorse for how you treated a fellow human being. You're apologizing because you found out I own the airplane you're sitting on. If I were just a regular man in a hoodie, flying to Los Angeles, you would have happily watched me be dragged off this flight in handcuffs, entirely satisfied that your worldview had been validated." Beatrice's mouth opened, but no words came out. The harsh, unvarnished truth of his statement stripped away her armor. "I accept your apology," Terence continued smoothly, "but I suggest you spend the rest of this flight reflecting on why you felt the need to apologize in the first place." He opened his laptop and resumed his typing, effectively dismissing her from his reality. Beatrice sank back into her seat, pulling her cashmere blanket up to her chin, her face burning with a shame she had not felt in decades. An hour later, as the aircraft crossed over the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, the smooth ride violently shattered. Without warning, the Boeing 777 hit severe clear-air turbulence. The plane dropped abruptly, causing a chorus of gasps to echo from the back of the cabin. The seatbelt chime dinged aggressively, flashing bright red above every row. "Flight attendants, take your jump seats immediately." Captain Foley's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding sharp and commanding. Jessica, who had been pushing the heavy beverage cart down the first-class aisle, stumbled as the floor seemingly vanished beneath her. The cart lurched forward, threatening to crash into the wooden bulkhead. Before Jessica could even react, Terence was out of his seat. He moved with athletic precision, grabbing the heavy metal handle of the cart and slamming his foot down on the wheel brake, locking it into place just inches from the wall. He caught Jessica by the elbow, steadying her as the plane violently shuddered again. "Are you all right?" Terence asked, raising his voice over the rattling of the cabin. "Yes, thank you, sir," Jessica gasped, her eyes wide with adrenaline. "Get to your jump seat, Jessica." "Strap in," Terence ordered, safely maneuvering himself back into seat 1A and clicking his own belt into place. The severe turbulence lasted for a grueling 10 minutes. When the violent shaking finally subsided into a manageable rattle, the seatbelt sign remained illuminated. But Captain Foley gave the all-clear for the cabin crew to resume essential duties. Terence unbuckled his belt and stood up. He wasn't interested in the first-class cabin anymore. He wanted to see how the rest of his airline was functioning under pressure. He walked through the thick curtain dividing the premium cabin from economy. The main cabin was in a state of chaotic recovery. Overhead bins had popped open, a few drinks had spilled, and infants were crying. Terence stood quietly by the mid-galley curtain, observing the crew. That was when he saw Patricia Danvers, the veteran flight attendant who just hours ago had weaponized her authority against Terence, was kneeling in the narrow aisle of row 34. Sitting in the window seat was an older heavyset man who was hyperventilating, clutching his chest in a state of sheer panic. Sitting next to the panicked man was a middle-aged woman in a designer sweater, practically screaming at Patricia. "Do something, give us a free drink or move us." The woman yelled, her face contorted with entitlement. "This airline is a complete joke. I demand to be moved to first class. He has a heart condition and this shaking is unacceptable." It was a mirror image. The woman was acting exactly the way Beatrice Lowell and Patricia herself had acted earlier that morning, using anger and entitlement to mask their insecurity. Terence watched closely. He expected Patricia to snap. He expected her to use her sharp, authoritarian tone to silence the woman. Instead, Patricia took a deep breath. She completely ignored the screaming woman and focused entirely on the panicked man. She reached out, gently taking his trembling hands in her own. "Sir, look right at me," Patricia said, her voice incredibly soft, radiating a deep maternal warmth. "My name is Patty. I've been flying for 20 years, and I promise you, this aircraft is built to handle 10 times the turbulence we just experienced. You are completely safe. Breathe with me. In through your nose, out through your mouth." She stayed kneeling on the hard floor, ignoring the spilled coffee soaking into her skirt, and calmly guided the man through a breathing exercise until his panic subsided. Only then did she turn to the screaming woman. "Ma'am, I understand you are frightened," Patricia said, maintaining perfect eye contact. "But yelling will not make the air any smoother. I am going to get you both some water, and I am going to ask you to remain seated. We will take excellent care of you." The screaming woman, disarmed by Patricia's unwavering calm and professionalism, slowly nodded and sank back into her seat. Terence stepped back behind the curtain, a quiet, satisfied smile touching his lips. Leadership wasn't just about punishing failure. It was about providing the opportunity for correction. Patricia had been humbled, and in that humility, she had found her grace. The culture of Zenith Airlines was already shifting. The descent into Los Angeles International Airport was spectacular. The golden hour sun cast a warm orange glow over the sprawling metropolis, reflecting off the Pacific Ocean in the distance. As the wheels of the Boeing 777 slammed onto the tarmac with a puff of white smoke, the reverse thrust engines roared, slowing the massive steel bird to a crawl. The cabin erupted into scattered applause, a standard reaction after a rough flight. But Terence knew the crew had genuinely earned it this time. The plane taxied to Terminal 4, pulling smoothly into Gate 41. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles." Captain Foley's voice resonated through the cabin speakers. It sounded different than it had in New York. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a grounded, authentic professionalism. "We know you have a choice when you fly, and we thank you for choosing Zenith Airlines. To all of our passengers, we want to reaffirm our commitment to treating every single person who steps onto our aircraft with the utmost respect and dignity. We are entering a new era here at Zenith, and we are honored to have you fly with us." Terence smiled. Foley had gotten the message. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and the cabin instantly filled with the chaotic rustle of passengers gathering their belongings. Terence stood up, easily pulling his leather duffel bag from the overhead bin. He stepped out into the aisle, preparing to disembark. Beatrice Lowell was struggling to pull her heavy, oversized designer carry-on from the bin above her. She looked at Terence, pausing for a moment, perhaps expecting him to offer his assistance. Terence simply gave her a polite nod, adjusted his hoodie, and walked right past her toward the front exit. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. As Terence approached the forward galley, the cockpit door swung open. Captain Foley stood in the doorway. He had removed his hat, holding it respectfully by his side. "Mr. Whitmore," Foley said, his voice quiet so the other passengers wouldn't hear. "Thank you for flying with us today, sir. And thank you for the lesson. It won't be forgotten." Terence extended his hand. Foley looked surprised for a fraction of a second before firmly grasping it. "You're a good pilot, Harrison," Terence said, using the captain's first name for the first time. "Keep the plane safe. I'll make sure the company takes care of the rest. I'll see you in the skies." Terence stepped off the aircraft and walked up the jet bridge. As he emerged into the bustling terminal of LAX, He wasn't met by anonymity. Standing right outside the gate was a delegation of 6 people, all dressed in immaculate, tailored suits. At the center of the group stood David, Terrence's chief operating officer, holding a sleek leather portfolio. "Welcome to the West Coast, boss," David smiled, falling into step beside Terrence as they began walking down the concourse. "How was the flight?" "Enlightening," Terrence replied, his eyes scanning the terminal, taking in the Zenith Airline's branding plastered across the departure screens. "We have a lot of structural rot to clear out. Entitlement has poisoned the customer service protocols from the top down. But the foundation is solid. The people just need to be reminded of who they serve." The board is assembled at the downtown office. "They're nervous," David noted, checking his watch. "Word leaked about the memo you had me issue regarding the anti-bias training. They think you're going to clean house." "I'm not going to clean house," Terrence said, his pace brisk and purposeful. "I'm going to build a better one. And anyone who doesn't want to live by the new rules is free to pack their bags." As they walked past the massive floor-to-sizing windows of the terminal, Terrence caught a reflection of himself. He was still wearing the same gray cashmere hoodie, the same dark jeans, the same understated sneakers. He looked nothing like the traditional image of a billionaire airline owner. And that, he realized, was his greatest asset. He didn't need to wear a 3-piece suit to command respect. He didn't need to flash his wealth to prove he belonged in first class. Real power didn't scream for attention. It whispered with undeniable authority. Back on the aircraft, Patricia Danvers was standing by the exit door, warmly thanking every single economy passenger as they disembarked, her smile finally genuine. Captain Foley was meticulously logging his flight data, executing his duties with a renewed sense of pride, and Beatrice Lowell was quietly wheeling her bag through the terminal, realizing for the first time in her life that her money could not buy her superiority. Terrence Whitmore walked out of the sliding glass doors of LAX and stepped into the waiting black SUV. The acquisition was complete. The real work was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story of justice, leadership, and breaking down prejudices, please hit that like button and share it with your friends. It helps our channel bring you more gripping, real-life inspired dramas where character and integrity win in the end. Have you ever experienced unfair judgment while traveling? Drop a comment below and let us know your story. We love reading your experiences. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next thrilling upload. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.